Welcome to our webinar, Presenting Debt for Climate. It's a campaign connecting social justice with climate justice and uniting social, workers, and environmental movements from the global South and North. We are calling to action around the G7 summit this summer to turn global North climate debt into climate action by canceling global South debts to keep fossil fuels in the ground and fund a just transition. Please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and remember to turn off your cameras and to turn off your audio. Please mute yourself. Today we have an amazing panel of speakers. Each of them has around 5 to 7 minutes to speak with us. I will be notifying you at the 6-minute mark. We have speakers from all around the world, from Latin America, from Africa, from the UK, from Washington, DC. And without further ado, I will hand the microphone over to our first speaker, who will be giving us an introduction about the campaign. He is Esteban Servat. He is a scientist and frontline anti-fracking activist from Argentina who is now living in Germany. He'll give us a general overview of the Debt for Climate campaign. Esteban, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Vivi. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Esteban. I come from Argentina, but I am living in Germany for the last almost 3 years. I come from the front lines of the fight against fracking in Vaca Muerta, one of the world's biggest shale gas basins in Argentina. And for the last 3 years, we have been working with a lot of the people in this webinar, building actions of international solidarity to tackle different parts of the extractive industries like fracking and mining and offshore drilling. And we have come to realize that we will not get very far unless we can also tackle debt. That our countries of the global South are really strangled by these financial debts. Many of them are completely illegitimate, illegal, given to dictators, unconstitutionally, and so on. And at the same time that the global North has this huge climate debt, because they are the countries that have done the most contributions of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere over their development, and that they are not they're not paying this climate debt. And even though there is a lot of demands for reparations and loss and damage and things like this, it seems to us that they will never answer to these demands in a significant way unless we can put enough pressure on the streets everywhere. And that's what this campaign is about. It's about making the global North pay its climate debt, or begin paying its climate debt, by canceling the debts of the global South, the financial debts that our countries from the global South owe to the global North, in order for that money to be used to finance a just transition, which is the only way that our countries of the global South could have remotely any chance at fulfilling their climate commitments and leaving fossil fuels in the ground. We know that this is not going to be easy, but we are going to get started on the G7 summit in Germany, which is happening in June 26th through June 28th. And we're already working with a lot of groups that are planning actions around the G7, not only in Germany, but globally. And this is where this campaign, which is being championed by the Global South, this campaign was led by the Global South and led from the grassroots, from the bottom up. We want to work with NGOs and all kinds of organizations as well, and with the people in the global North, but it has to be clear that this campaign, unlike many others, is led and championed by the people of the global South and the grassroots. And we are calling for a global mobilization around the G7 all over the world, which will involve labor unions, social movements, and climate movements coming together. And we think this is a very powerful sign of unity at a time when so many forces are trying to drive away the social movements and the workers from the climate movements. This is an opportunity to come together, connecting debt and climate, and actually put the pressure on the G7, which are the 7 most powerful economies in the world that govern the IMF and govern the World Bank, in order to put enough pressure so that they can change their policies in order to lead to the renegotiation and to the cancellation of our debts from the global South. And this is a long-term process, a long-term vision. It will not be done in one day, but on that day, we will build, give birth to this movement on the streets, which is the only way where change can come from. And then from giving birth to this mobilization on the streets in June, we plan to go on toward COP and to longer term plans in order to hit at strategic moments and milestones. And so we're very happy to do this webinar for groups that wanted to join and for you to share this with anyone else you know, so that we can really come together in a significant way all over the world and be tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands wherever we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esteban, for that introduction. So next we will hear from Juan Pablo Olson. He is from Argentina. He is the Latin American coordinator with Progressive International and also founder of the Argentina Sin Fracking or Argentina Without Fracking movement. He will be talking about the Argentine case of illegitimate indebtedness and the IMF scam, as well as the need to promote a great global movement that questions illegitimate debts, oppression, and colonialism. Juan Pablo.
Muchas gracias, Vivi. Muchas gracias a todos y a todas.
Thank you, Vivi. Thank you so much, everyone. I am happy to be here in this international meeting with all of our voices and our participation of a great summing. And most of the rest speakers are going to talk and they're going to express that this is the time to get together and to communicate. I want to greatly thank the translators, the interpreters, because their role is very important in overcoming the language barrier and, of course, to make concrete this invitation so the movement actually garners enough strength in order to build an alternative that includes social justice and climate justice, and will allow us to build alternatives facing colonialism, the serious problem that we're facing in Africa, South America, Latin America, and all those countries from the global south. We all know the seriousness of global warming and the release of the latest intergovernmental panel on climate, and we only have 8 to 10 years to react and to create a change without precedent. What opportunities is Argentina going to have in order to make a transition? If the IMF have imposed during the period of the Donald Trump and the White House in the United States, debt of $44 billion, which were totally used for fuel, and now it has imposed another leak of debt. As read for the mobilization on Washington, this imposes a vicious cycle of impoverishment, which will entail the advance of oil and gas corporations, these corporations that advance in extractivism in order to pillage our resources. With these illegitimate debts weighing on our countries, is going to be impossible to make a transition. And without a global movement that works on this invitation, and without an alliance between the South, the global South, and the Northern South, we are going to be condemned to doomsday. With Argentina, with a country with 50% of its population that is below the lines of poverty, what are the chances that we can actually affect this transition, this just an ecological environmental transition? Argentina's case is repeated in African countries and in other Latin American countries. Adriana from Uruguay will be able to describe how corporations advance with extractivist activities, with fossil fuel activities, polluting the major water reservoir of Latin America. From this moment, we can convey the hope that these types of initiatives gives us a global movement where among all countries and from all continents, we participate with a vision to promote this invitation in order to put pressure on the World Bank, the IMF, and the main governments in the world in order to make them understand not only the issues of Donald Trump, for example, imposing this unjust policies on debt for Argentina. We need positive leadership that create the mobilization of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people in order to build a future scenario that is sustainable, climate justice and social justice. Therefore, in this invitation for all movements in Argentina and all South America and Latin America to work together internationally in a mobilization where we firmly state our objectives. Thank you very much, and let's be together in this fight.
Thank you very much. So just a reminder to ask any questions you have in the chat. You can ask them in whatever language you want. Well, you can ask them in Spanish and English. So next we have Sonny Morgan. He is a climate justice activist from South Africa and is active in many movements. He will talk about the perspective of debt for climate for South Africa, the debt burden, and the potential and need for coming together globally. Sonny.
Thank you very much. So I want to start a bit unconventionally and ask if we can, whoever is available, to bow our heads just for a moment. We have lost 300 people in our country over the last 2 days. I'll tell you a story after a moment of silence. Thank you. So it's a really sad time in South Africa at the moment. We suffered over the last 2 days what climate scientists will call a rain bomb. It fell over one of our provinces, one of our most popular provinces. Enough rain in just 2 days, 1/3 of our annual rainfall for that province fell. It led to mudslides, flooding, total devastation. Today, the count was standing at 307 people who lost their lives. One of the most popular areas of our country for holidays, for resorts, for tourism, completely devastating. The country is totally unprepared from a disaster point of view. So the country is in mourning at the moment. We have been preaching the effects of climate change for over a decade in our country, and the government and corporations and most people don't really take it serious. The president is touring the area today, and that is bringing home this idea that that this is a climate shock that we were unprepared for. A certain NGO in the country from tomorrow will start to go to various police stations to lay charges of murder and culpable homicide against the government. So this is how serious we are taking this issue. So to bring it back to 2 corporations in South Africa in the last month have been guilty of polluting our waterways by being negligent in how they store acid mine drainage and process water. So the climate crisis and the devastation of the climate shocks, plus the behavior of corporates, are in the news at the moment. So I'm going to address those 3 big issues. So the relevance of this program, we have been asking ourselves as climate justice activists in South Africa for a long time, what one campaign, what one global issue, what problem will bring millions of people out on the street. We are seized with this question of what can bring millions of people out on the streets because we know what did not bring them out on the street. Corruption in the country and state capture did not bring them out on the streets. The highest unemployment rate, one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, did not bring them out on the street. In terms of the Gini coefficient, we are the most unequal country in the world. The haves and the have-nots, and I joke to say the have-yachts, right? So we are in that stage that internationally we are recognized as the most unequal country on the planet, let alone on the continent. So developing this idea together with Esteban and Juan Pablo from the Global South communities, it dawned on me that the issue that can bring millions of people out on the streets, not just in Africa, but across the planet, is this idea of the climate crisis. Now, we do see all of the strikes, we do see all of the other initiatives, but we have not been able to tie those initiatives to positive climate action, something that will fundamentally change the conversation around the climate problem. We have all of these issues around the IPCC report. We, in the same breath, say that this is the code red for the planet. In the same breath, on the same day, the UK announces 40 new licenses for oil exploration in the North Sea. On the same day, in our country, barely, the IPCC report barely got any mention, because the only thing that is being mentioned and spoken about are the new exploration licenses by Shell, Total, and all of these people. And we even talk about EACOP, the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline, that is going ahead full steam, whilst we are talking about there should be no fossil fuels, there should be no new exploration. So they're not listening to us. So we tie this to the note of that we have to take action that is unusual. We have to take action that is bold. We have to take action that is innovative. And we have to take action that is actually revolutionary. And what more revolutionary than to say to the capitalist system and the structures that, listen, we are holding you responsible as the global South and indigenous people, holding you responsible for the damage, not just over the last 10 years or over the last 20 years, but since the Industrial Revolution. You have been extracting from the global South and exporting to the global North. We're holding you responsible for all of that, whether it's slavery, whether it's colonialism, but we're going to hold in on your climate debt. And your climate debt, we can say to you that we have a number, and our number in the global South is the real number of, on our balance sheets, the liabilities that we owe to the World Bank and to the IMF. We are going to advise you, we are going to tell you, and then we are going to hold you responsible for your climate debt. We are going to do that by calling globally in unison with other comrades around the world, particularly led by the global South. We are going to hold you accountable, and we are going to launch an international campaign where we're going to bring millions out on the streets, so that you can write off, so that you can write off your obligations. What we will offer you in return is not a peace offering. What you get in return is that we use the savings of not having to pay the debt to improve the quality of lives of our people, of our workers, to increase, reduce unemployment, increase wages, and then to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. Because without it, we will have to take and to develop to the levels that is necessary for us. We will have to explore, and we don't explore if you write off our debt. We're going to call for this effectively, and we're going to do it in global solidarity with each of you and the movements in your country, led by the Global South. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very passionate speech. Now let's move on to Kathy Allen, who works with XR global groups and global campaigns around the climate crisis in general. She's going to talk about why it matters that this movement is Global South led. Kathy.
Hi, so yeah, I'm part of Extinction Rebellion Global. I spend most of my time in global campaigns, largely as like a kind of support. Admin support. And I'm really just going to talk about one thing, that perspective matters, that where the narrative's coming from, what the main plot and subplot are, these things matter. So I live in the UK, where we largely experience the convenient and comfortable end of capitalism. And no connection is generally made between the goods and services that bless our lives and the wreckage that these cause in other parts to people and planet. And obviously that suits the system. The last thing that capitalism wants is for anybody to feel a little bit doubtful or a little bit uncomfortable with what they purchase. And even the environmental messaging in the global south, global north predominantly does not focus on the rough end of capitalism, the reality of what's happening in the global south. Our messaging tends in general to be quite conceptual and quite vague. So we talk a lot about fossil fuels and CO2 and the future, and the global south experience tends to be often a subplot or an add-on. Meanwhile, in the most affected areas where the fight against environmental wrecking and livelihood destruction and contamination, blatant injustice has been going on for, like, well, you could say centuries, but for sure at over half a century, and that where climate change itself has been struggled against, like, to try to get recognition for decades. And these voices, they carry anger, they carry pain, and they carry the authority of experience of what it is to fight the beast and where to attack it. So I would just say a couple of things about this is that it just seems to me more likely that disruptive ideas about where to attack the beast of capitalism will come not from the areas of comfort and convenience where I live, but more likely from the areas that have been exposed to the brutal ugliness of capitalism. And in any case, these voices come with emotions linked to realities and are often bolder. And secondly, if the global north unite behind the global south in, for example, this campaign, the Debt for Climate campaign, it makes those who experience the worst end of the system the main plot. And the underlying message of that is that no one is less valuable than anybody else. And that for sure turns the tables on the standard order of capitalism. So I would argue that it's important to stand behind and unite behind the global south messaging for many reasons. And I think that this perspective in any case is more disruptive and more useful for everybody. Thank you, Vivi. Thank you, interpreters, as always.
Thank you so much, Kathy. We appreciate it here from the Global South. So yeah, just another quick reminder that if anyone has any questions for the speakers, you can please put that in the chat in Spanish or English, whichever you prefer. And next up is Rob Callender, who is part of the Jubilee for Climate. He is from the UK. He is a community, economic, and climate justice activist who will be talking about anti-capitalism, what the view from the North is, and rebuilding our confidence and vision. Rob.
Hello, everyone, and I just want to say it's a real honor to be here and to spend time with you again. And I just want to say thank you to Kathy and Juan Pablo and Esteban and Sunny for speaking already and for making this space. Thank you. On September the 27th in the year 2000, 12,000 protesters stopped the IMF and the World Bank from meeting. The meeting was to further the controlling grip on the finances of the world. What is finance capital for some is the lifeline of others who have been made dependent through no choice of their own on the trickle of investment that flows in from institutions like these. This trickle hides the flood of wealth that disappears out of these nations and from the people, resulting directly in loss of life. In 2021, a few of us argued a case in court. We said that our action to pressure governments to cancel African debt at the height of COVID was motivated by necessity, which legally means we broke a law, we climbed the parliament in order to prevent immediate loss of life. The judge, reluctantly, it seemed to us, found us guilty, but we weren't guilty. Under its current form, that is imperialism controlled, debt is a cleverly managed reconquest of Africa, aiming at subjugating its growth and development through foreign rules, Thus, each one of us becomes a financial slave, which is to say, a true slave. Thomas Sankara said that in 1987 before he was murdered. On Tuesday this week, Sri Lanka didn't pay its debt. On Monday, BlackRock, one of the largest asset managers in the world, refused to restructure Zambia's debt. This will cause currency depreciation, making the cost of everything more expensive. People will suffer. The suffering will go on for years. Where have those anti-capitalists from Prague gone? I want to talk about the North's role because it is a vital one. It follows on from what Kathy and Sunny said. Because debt links, it literally bonds North and South. And it also transcends the dualism of North and South. What it shows is something deeper. It shows how inequality itself is weaponized. I first used this phrase in court and have repeated it countless times since. Debt weighs like a knee on the neck. Our role in the North is vital because it is a British knee, an American knee, a European knee. Because it's here that financial laws are made that govern the financial flows of global central banks and globalized private creditors and the bonds themselves. It's in these places that the threat of sanction or violence is legitimized in contracts designed to benefit the lender and restrict the autonomy of the debtor in the name of increasing the flow of capital and stimulating blind economic growth. In the North, we have a responsibility to be the most radical because the body of the monster, as Kathy called it, and its history is here. Climate change is about more than clean air. It's about creating the incentive to repair, and that's impossible while people can't breathe. We have to take the knee from the neck. And people can't breathe in the UK either today due to rising prices and inflation, and they want to repair too, but they cannot because there is no power behind them. And that is what we can do in this movement. That, I believe, is the strategy we must adopt in order to build this movement in the North. And that's what we're trying to do at the moment with the Jubilee movement, joining up with this movement. I was talking to someone in my very white family recently, and we got onto talking about Black power. They had no idea what it meant, so I repeated Huey Newton. When you fight with a white person, you're not afraid of them. You're afraid of what's behind them, the law, the police, the whole system. When you fight with a Black person, there's nothing behind them. So you can do whatever you like, humiliate them, lynch them, anything. That's what he said. I sometimes feel like environmental movements and other movements believe that they in the North will inevitably succeed if only they keep, getting arrested, because they're propelled by that same arrogance of white power that defined the culture of the boarding school I went to and the schools that the Prime Minister of this country and a huge proportion of the elite in many European countries go to the reunions of. The movie Don't Look Up was actually about white power. The Black people in that movie were invisible, but the scientists, played mostly by whites, were in the powerless role. This misunderstanding of power is why the movie was so very wrong. And I sometimes fear that the environmental movement is not trying to build Black power because it thinks that white power will do it. The white power expectation of the scientists without the work to build the Black power. But this movement gives me hope. This movement is about building that power in the right way. We need to build the power of unions and communities. We need to build the power of the poor, of debtors, of Black and brown people and women and lesbian, gay, trans, queer and disabled people. First, we need to take the knee off the neck. We need to show with our clear aim where the knee is. Every one of the categories I just mentioned is accompanied by inequality, and every inequality is accompanied by a pay gap, a wealth gap, and debt. And the debt is a trap, and someone else gets wealthy from it. Someone owns the debt. Someone charges rent for the money in your pocket, for the business you want to start, for the healthcare you can't live without. This fight that we're talking about today is a fight for all of those communities. It's a fight for all the people, and it's a fight for the planet. What it says is you can't screw us, the people, risk-free. There are consequences. It will hurt. And that's the belief and confidence and vision we need to have if we are to build hope and imagination and win. We do have a responsibility with our movements in the North to ask, what happens after you've stopped oil? Glencore is still forcing artisanal miners from their land in the Democratic Republic of Congo to have access to more cobalt for Tesla batteries. There's nowhere else to go for these miners. Not working means starvation, all because of finance and land access and centuries of colonial policies and the great white export of destabilization. What can stop the burning of the Amazon while Brazil's debt have risen to 90% of GDP? A payday loan from the IMF? Who is listening to Ecuador begging to protect areas of the Galapagos? If only the North would cancel the debt. We pass the mic so often in the North, but we don't listen. We like to wag our powerful white fingers. There is an economic warfare going on and everyone's wealth is involved in it. And while movements aim to cut off the oily head of the monster over here, we see that it is a hydra and 5 more heads will appear with teeth. And we wonder why the earth cannot heal. Meanwhile, the inequality grows and the green transition will cost people who are brown or black more than it costs the whites. This is the green hydra of capitalism. Climate change is symptom, not the disease. We must strike at the heart of the monster, at the system's root, and that is debt. And I say this lovingly as an activist. I've been in the different cells. I know that Greenpeace celebrated their 50th anniversary last year. And for those 50 years, the world has been getting hotter quicker because they have been fighting the hydra. They've been cutting off heads and other movements are doing the same thing. We don't have 50 more years. We need revolution. And I'm sure it begins here with this movement, with great hands from the South guiding the hands of awakening people everywhere as we aim the sword at the heart of the monster. I'm sure we can only win with a belief in Black power, in building the power behind people and each other. There are 7.753 billion solutions, and we need all of them to be free. Thank you for your pain, your struggle, for everything you've made yourself into to be here. We will need more transformations of you. Cancel debt, cancel capitalism, cancel climate change. In that order, no other.
Thank you so much, Rob. I love the knee analogy. Next, we will be moving on to Reb Spring. She is a 16-year-old climate activist in Washington, D.C., who's part of Extinction Rebellion, D.C. She'll be talking about why the IMF and World Bank are problematic and presenting a spoken word piece. Reb.
Hi, thank you all for having me and for everyone else's wonderful words. Yeah, so the IMF and World Bank, as others have talked about, have imposed a massive amount of debt onto the global South, which has imposed restrictions and preventing social services, which has forced many global South countries to resort to fossil fuel extraction to pay off this debt, and which has caused environmental problems in these countries and perpetuates climate change, which affects the global South most. And these fossil fuels that they're extracting are sent to the global North to pay off this debt. And also the global North is responsible for 92% of the overall global fossil fuel emissions. And the US is responsible for 40% of global emissions. And the US and the global North, the Europe, these are the countries that are holding the power in the IMF and World Bank. So it's a massive inequality that needs to be righted. And this campaign is going to right this inequality. And the IMF and the World Bank, the people holding power in it, they're the ones they have an ecological debt because they're causing climate change. And so they need to repay this ecological debt by canceling the debt of the global South. We need a debt swap. And so now I'm going to present my spoken word piece, Climate Colonialism. Climate colonialism in the global South. We're setting a fire that we must oust. Corporations extracting, contaminating, destroying homelands of indigenous peoples, they're polluting. The US and Europe colonized the economy, giving the global South little autonomy, luring poor countries into a loan trap, impossible to get out, states running in laps, loans illegally handed to dictators and fools, the IMF violating its own rules, trillions of dollars the global South owes, forced into austerity measures they never chose. Indebted places exposed to invading, companies drilling, fracking, and mining, stolen resources shipped to the global North, while fake climate promises are being put forth. Argentina decimated by the IMF. President Macri, to benefit himself, got the largest loan the IMF let, putting Argentina into massive deficit. Major restrictions preventing social services. Argentinians mobilizing against these disservices. Theft by multinational fossil fuel corporations. To communities they destroyed, they must pay reparations. The global North contributes most to climate change, while the global South suffers from exploitative exchange. The US and Europe have an ecological obligation. Cancel the debt, protect all the nations. And so here in DC, we're taking action against the IMF and the World Bank headquarters to tell them to cancel the debt, to repay their ecological debt. And we're continuing an ongoing movement against the IMF. And we're gonna keep it going. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rob, for that beautiful poem. Everyone is applauding you. I don't know if you can see them. So thank you so much. So we have one more speaker, and then Esteban will be giving a quick wrap up before we move on to questions. So if you have any questions, now is the perfect time to be putting them in the chat so that we can choose which questions to ask. So our last but certainly not least important speaker is Adriana Carvajal. She is a teacher and president of the ACAS, Asociación Civil Ambientalista de Salto. She is from Uruguay. She also works to protect one of the most important water reservations, which was mentioned earlier. Adriana, tienes la palabra.
Adriana, the floor is yours. Can you hear me? Yes, we can hear you, but we cannot see you. Now you can see me? Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah. I wanted to thank all of the participants, all of the speakers, and the organizers of this important event. And I don't want to talk too long. I want to go straight to the point, as we say here. And yes, I'm a teacher who works in Uruguay. Uruguay, let me tell you about my country very briefly, is a small country, and we are in South America. We have borders on the east with the with the Argentina Republic, and on the north with Brazil. We have a prosperous country in regards to soil wealth for food production, and it's very rich in regards to livestock. We have beautiful coasts. Our country is highly appreciated for its tourism, beautiful beaches. And this is what we need to preserve. We need to help the conservation of these places. Over the last few years, talking about these world events, the IMF and the Inter-American Development Bank have done their studies and research on our small country in order to map it, searching for possible reserves of hydrocarbons. And they mapped our country, as it is very slow, from north to south, east to west, and they found that the reserves in our country are non-conventional reserves. In order to extract them, there is the necessity to include the devastating technique of fracking with the resulting consequences, damaging consequences that it has on human health, and what we are discussing right now, which is greenhouse gas emissions, which will contribute to climate change, which will contribute negatively. Our small country has, of course, financial, economic problems. There is unemployment, of course. Some multinational companies come to our country in the south to offer businesses so that the governments unfortunately accept without taking into account the environmental damage. For example, United States companies, Australian companies, French companies have been doing their explorations and their surveys, searching for non-conventional hydrocarbons, and accidents have been caused for lack of expertise of some of those companies in our territories. We are deeply worried because the aquifer, the Guarani aquifer, is one of the greatest, one of the largest drinking water reserves. We know that water is indispensable for life, and we need to help guard it in its purest state of purity. Our aquifer has been observed by all these companies that come from the north, bringing these promises of help. They tell us that they come here with pro- prosperity and they're going to improve our social and financial conditions, our economic conditions. And the governments who open the doors to those companies are guilty for that too. They are to blame for that. The common citizen in Uruguay is a very quiet person, and our population is not prepared for this fight. We are this association that continues working. We want to work on the ground. We work with the communities by means of spreading the information, creating outreach, and participating with other organizations in our country and neighboring countries, for example, Argentina and Brazil as well, and Paraguay as well, who are the ones who have sovereignty over the Guarani aquifer. That's why we have gotten together and we have created several demonstrations in our territory, as I said, marches, demonstration, public hearings, and we have talked to different embassies and we are working together, doing joint work in such a way that our concerns are transmitted. And we want to maintain that northern empire far away from our territory, far away from our land. We want to keep the empire out of Paraguay. We want to have the Uruguayans enjoy that thing that we are wealthy, in the water. Water, the commodity without which we know life is impossible. We can say that our country right now, and these environmental associations are very worried here in our country because we want there to be a law, an act, a legal framework in order to avoid and cancel and ban this damaging fracking technique. We did achieve a moratorium that came to a halt in January this year. It's expired, and we are waiting for the commissions, the industry commissions, to take us into account, and we can bring our voices and our message to Parliament. You have a minute so that we can express that this is not what we want for our country. What we do want is to preserve the water commodity, which is what is going to make us prosperous facing the future. And that's why we want to express that if we agree with this particular worldwide movement, you can count on us. And we want to thank everyone and welcome to the fight for the environment. Thank you.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias, Adriana. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Adriana.
Please, so to wrap up and then move on to questions, Esteban has the floor again.
Thank you, Vivi. Thank you, Adriana. I want to thank all the translators that have made this bilingual webinar possible at all. And that's a key part of everything we're going to do going forward. And all I wanted to add is that, as you can see from all the speakers that we've been here today from Latin America, Africa, North America, Europe, we can see that the importance of bringing together our struggles and tackling the IMF, the World Bank, and the concentrated capital, financial capital, and powers of the world. So we are really connecting social justice with climate justice. I think this is something that everyone is trying to do. And now we have a real opportunity to do it from the bottom up, from the global south and from the grassroots. So we want to invite everyone to join us. Nobody is one too many. We need the support and the collaboration with every movement that wants to fight for humanity, for the planet, and for equality. So if you're a climate movement or you have friends in the labor movement and social movements, we want to connect with you all. I have written the contact information in the chat. Get in touch with us. We're already many movements from all over the world, but we need to be millions on the streets. That's our aim. And even if we are not millions by the G7, we will keep building, because we know the only thing that can make this impossible possible is millions of people on the streets everywhere. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you, Esteban. So he will be putting the contact links again in the chat. So we'll move on to our first question. And this question is for Sunny from South Africa, or at least I think he will be best prepared to answer it. The question is, what tactics can African countries employ to call for reparations for slavery and colonialism, as well as climate death at the same time?
So I've been pondering that question for probably a decade. So I think I'm ready for the answer, with an answer. And the simple answer is that we must ask for it. We must demand it. So what has happened for too long, that question has existed intellectually, right? We think that it's a good idea to have climate reparations. It's a good idea to say that there must be reparations for slavery. But what we need to do is, first of all, we must popularize the call. We must ask for it on every platform. That's the first thing. They'll take notice of us and they'll say, wow, these people woke up. That's the first thing we must do. Then we must use the tools. And I think there are two tools that can be used very effectively. Global mobilization. Right? Global mobilization is the most effective tool. And the second thing, we mustn't forget that there is a legal framework, right? We don't use the legal framework enough. We haven't launched cases in The Hague, at the criminal court. We haven't gone to hold people accountable. When you tell us BlackRock refuses to renegotiate someone's loan, well, we will say, well, we want to sue BlackRock for the damage it's done. So we need to use two things: make the call global and organize globally. We sometimes in the global south have been asleep like a dragon that has forgotten that it can spit fire. That's what we need to do, right? Well, yeah, if there's a chance at the end of the call, I've taken the lead from Rob, that debt is the knee on the neck, and I've written a few lines that I would like to share at the end of the call.
Sounds great, Sunny. Thank you so much. We have one question that was also made that we can see if this is an open question for all the speakers. So the person asked, if I'm not mistaken, the IMF is made up of the finance ministers and central bank governors. Are they the key targets to focus mobilizations on, or are there other actors that people should consider? Another part of the question was, what allies do we have within the IMF member states, if we have any? Does any of the speakers want to answer this?
I can go if no one else wants to go. Well, anyone else? No. Okay. So the first thing that we have to clarify is that this is a decentralized campaign. Nobody is going to have a global coordination telling any country what to do. But what we need to do is build internal pressure in our countries of the global south so that we can have those allies that you are asking about. The only way that we could have Argentina, Brazil, South Africa, and other countries of the global south to become allies in terms of championing this campaign from the global south governments is first if you have the global south labor unions, social movements, and climate movements coming together to exert enough pressure on those governments. Because even the most progressive and environmentally aware governments cannot get away from the pressures and powers of the of the IMF and the World Bank. So we first need to put pressure from within as well as pressure from outside, which is where we come in play in Europe and in Washington, D.C., like Reb was explaining. We need to hit them where it hurts them because, for example, the last few weeks, there's been mobilizations in Argentina almost daily because, as Juan Pablo was explaining, the IMF and the government signed a new deal to get more debt to pay the old debt, which was illegitimate, but they are legitimizing it in the process. So, you know, these mobilizations, the IMF doesn't care. The reality is they don't care. We are invisible unless we make those mobilizations visible. And that's the power and the potential of this campaign, because this time when they mobilize by the tens of thousands around the world, they will no longer be invisible because we will tackle them and visibilize them in Germany, in England, in France, in Washington, D.C., and all over the global north. So that's how we need to build power, and we need to build pressure from within the governments of the global south as well as from the global north. And that's how we target them. And then you asked about whether the finance ministers are good targets. I think they are good targets, but they are secondary targets. If you are in France, in Spain, in Ireland, in Norway, and you want to do an action, go find the IMF office, the IMF building, the World Bank building. Those are the prime targets to mobilize against because we will do so globally. And then, of course, you can go to individuals, but I think they have a lot less power to tackle those individuals, but it's always worth thinking of.
Thank you, Esteban. If I can have you continue this thread a little longer, I see some questions around how to do these actions. Some people are saying, is a mass movement enough? Should we do direct actions? Others are asking, is civil disobedience enough? How do countries in the global south do civil disobedience? Right now, you mentioned countries with IMF headquarters, but I'm sure many, as in Ecuador, we don't. We can wrap up with this question as how can we start thinking about mobilizing? And I'll give it back to Esteban, who was just talking about this, and then we'll finish off with Sunny.
Then we'll give it to Sunny. Okay, so basically my answer to that is, if you are in the global south, let the global north take the radical actions. Let the global north take the risk and go to jail. Like Rob was saying, the global north has the obligation to be the most radical. So, you know, if you're in Ecuador or Argentina, it's not safe for people to do civil disobedience at the scale that we need to. You, of course, are welcome to do that, but the most powerful thing that you can do in Ecuador, in the global south, is try to mobilize as many people as you can. And then that image, that picture will be shown in the global north. And I think the global north countries and movements should really think, okay, maybe if you're from XR, doing civil disobedience, really take it farther to do disruptive actions that can actually help our struggles of the global south be visible and be spoken about in the media, which is what we need to reach. So that's all, and we need to end on time because the translation is only available for 1 hour. So we give the word to Sunny, and thanks everyone for joining. And there's the email to contact us for whoever wants to join.
Thank you, Esteban. For some of the people in the call who may be confused about what Esteban is saying about we allow the global north to take the radical actions, I try to put it in perspective. It's dangerous for people in the global south. We don't have the privilege of whiteness, of richness, of privilege like the global north is. So it's very, very dangerous. Our central point in the global south activities is safety first. You need to take care of yourself. So that's the most important thing. The other issue, of course, when it's possible, we must occupy. This idea of just protesting in the streets is just different, walking past buildings. No, we have to occupy and we have to disrupt. So take care, everyone. I was really inspired by Rob's delivery, very poetic. So Rob, this is for you. That is the knee on the neck. It's the corporations who hold us in check. It's like a rope, nay, a noose. Time to pull that loose. I'm here to break free, not for me. It's you I see. Activist, mother, child, worker. Time to stop the greed. There is so much need. We can't breathe. Join me, friends. It's time to break a knee.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Sunny. Now that we are ending, I would also like to please invite the interpreters, Rogelia and Camilo, to please put your cameras on, and for everyone to give them a round of applause for their amazing, amazing work today. These types of bilingual calls would not be possible without you. So thank you so, so much, Rogelia and Camilo. Thank you everyone who has come with us today. Please send Esteban a message if you would like to be included in our Signal chats. And thank you so much for being with us today.